Warning. Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat involves the discussion of horror and suspense movies. These movies often include violent, frightening, and disturbing content. Also, we sometimes discuss ladies and their lovely physical attributes, and we sometimes discuss topics considered naughty to talk about in polite company. This program is intended for audiences over the age of 18. Viewer discretion is advised.
All right, good morning, everybody. I just got off the phone with Helen over at PBDCTV headquarters, and she absolutely read me the riot act about using Galaxy of Terror in last week's show. She said it was disgusting and reprehensible and blah, blah, blah. But then I reminded her that Oddmother talked about Hagazusa once in a broadcast, so she grumbled a bit, but she had to let it go. So we're not canceled, at least not yet. So that's the good news. Now listen. October, it was kind of easy to pick what we were going to talk about because we had a Halloween theme going, but now that we're into November, we've got to change things up a bit. So last week was good. Last week we did sci-fi horror, and that seemed to go over pretty well. We got 3 views again, and at least 2 of the people were awake. So this week we're going to do a couple of recent releases, and bonus, one of them is a superhero horror movie, which I just love. And since Gwen and Raveena did such a good job on that history lesson about John Carpenter's Halloween, I was thinking they could do a follow-up for this episode. Basically a history of superheroes.
Damn you, Carl. You suck.
Oh, pipe down, intern. This will be fun. I've even brought some research material for you here. So here's the first 10 issues of the Avengers, and first 10 issues of X-Men, first 10 issues of Spider-Man. Oh, and Essential Captain America.
Isn't the movie Brightburn based upon a Superman story? These books are all from Marvel.
Oh, don't worry, we're getting there. It all kind of goes together. Okay, so here's the DC stuff. So here we've got Batman, The Dark Knight Returns. We've got Batman, The Killing Joke. Oh, here's one of my favorites. We got DC's Kingdom Come. This is a great alternate future history for the Justice League. So I thought you could go through the basic history and backstory of the cornerstone heroes from DC and from Marvel, and then maybe put together a narrative that compares and contrasts the different types of heroes, you know, the Batman types versus the Superman types. And then maybe compare and contrast the DC characters with their Marvel counterparts, you know, Bruce Wayne versus Tony Stark, Clark Kent versus Carol Danvers. Fancy, would you please put that down? You're making me nervous. So anyway, No, Fancy, seriously, what are you doing? Okay, like I was saying, Gwen's been working really hard lately, so we're gonna give her this week off. No need to put together a history lesson for this week's show. Hey, Gwen, why don't you go to the spa or something like that?
Gee, Carl, that's very kind of you. Maybe we could get her some Nutter Butters, too.
Yeah, the Nutter Butters, yeah. I'm going to head out and pick some of those up just as soon as the room stops spinning, and maybe after the swelling goes down, since I can only see out of the one eye right now.
You should probably go lie down for a bit, Carl. Don't worry. I'll take care of things here.
That's a good idea, Fancy. I'm going to go lie down now. Thanks. Thank you, Fancy. You're the best.
Okay then, so let's do an early lunch today. Except you, Raveena. The show's a little short this week, so we'll need you to review a superhero film.
Damn you, Fancy. You suck even worse than Carl sucks.
Hello, and welcome to Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat, your place for a fun review of horror movies. I am your host, Steve the Cat. We are well into November. Halloween has come and gone. Thanksgiving is on the way, but we still have plenty of scary movies to talk about between now and the end of 2021. We've done a number of old school movies this year, but tonight we're going to do something a little bit different. Instead of going old school, we're going to do a couple of movies that are very, very recent. But they're both available to you through various streaming alternatives, and both of them are very good. I recommend both of them. So, hope you enjoy them. Thank you so much for watching. Now, here we go.
Everyone grab your pencils and notebooks. It's time for Steve's vocabulary lesson.
Class is in session. Yes, it is once again time for Steve's vocabulary lesson. This is the part of the show where we discuss new and creative uses of the English language in an effort to stay ahead of social media bots and algorithms that would otherwise try to ban our conversation. We've got 3 words this week, so let's get into it. Word number 1. Cash drawing. This is a noun that refers to the act whereby the monster under your bed reaches out, grabs you by the ankles, and suddenly pulls you under the bed, usually while you scream and vainly claw at the floor. Word number 2. Pac-Manning. This is a noun that refers to the action of using mechanical force to open a character's mouth far beyond its designed range of motion. Colloquial forms of this include Mr. Mouthing and bear trapping. Word number 3, zap augering. This is a noun that refers to the action of using an energy-based weapon, such as a laser or Godzilla's atomic breath, to bore a hole through a character. Now, we've had multiple discussions of boring holes through characters this season, so let's set everybody straight. This is distinct from bosom augering and noggin augering that we've talked about earlier this season. Those 2 words rely upon a mechanical drilling process. Zap augering utilizes an energy-based process. So you launch missiles with a big screw on top of them like we saw in an early Godzilla movie. That's bosom augering. You hold somebody down and run a surgical drill through their skull like we saw in Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. Noggin augering. You bore a hole through somebody using a laser beam. That's zap augering, so please keep these terms in mind. They will become important later in the episode. And that is Steve's vocabulary lesson for this week.
And now, please enjoy this episode of Movies That Suck, hosted by Raveena the Intern.
Hello, I am Raveena the Intern. Welcome to Movies That Suck. Tonight we will discuss the classic DC Comics film from 2013, Man of Steel. Man of Steel was directed by Zac Snyder and utilized a highly experimental practice known as open source screenwriting. In open source screenwriting, each individual page of a screenplay is written separately by a different screenwriter, with no regard for what has happened on previous or subsequent pages of the script. The result can be thought of as the cinematic equivalent of a Mad Lib. The film opens on the planet Krypton, where former Roman gladiator Jor-El battles with a megalomaniac named General Zod over possession of something called the Codex. I'm not sure exactly what the Codex is, but given Russell Crowe's present physique, I assume it is a large box of Twinkies. Jor-El feeds the magic Codex Twinkies to Kal-El, his newborn son, and then launches Kal-El in a rocket towards the planet Earth. Krypton is destroyed in an explosion soon after, because apparently a planet that had already mastered interstellar travel centuries earlier never got around to devising a planetary evacuation plan. Once he arrives on Earth, Kal-El begins a reign of terror. First he travels to the Canadian Arctic, terrorizing truck drivers and destroying tractor trailers along the way. Then he steals an abandoned Kryptonian spaceship from the army, attacking Lois Lane with his heat vision in the process. It is at this point that, through a series of flashbacks, we are led to understand that this behavior is not Kal-El's fault, because after his arrival on Earth he was raised by a serial killer named Jonathan Kent. Jonathan Kent was a mild-mannered farmer from the town of Smallville, Kansas, or so we are supposed to believe. In reality, Jonathan Kent was a cornucopia of psychiatric disorders that manifested themselves in contempt for his fellow Kansans, combined with an innate sense of his own family's superiority and dramatic mood swings. Thus, Kal-El, whom Jonathan calls Clark, is subjected to a childhood of alternately hearing that he is the most powerful and important person in the world, but that he must never use his powers to help anyone. Jonathan tells Clark that he is so important that he will one day change the world, but then Jonathan sulks and pouts because Clark wants to become something more than a simple farmer. Finally, Jonathan is forced to confess that Clark is not really his son and that Clark was found in the wreckage of a crashed spaceship. At the same time, Jonathan confesses to at least one murder. It seems that Jonathan was a friend with a science professor at Kansas State, and that Jonathan allowed the friend to examine part of the wreckage where Clark was discovered. Jonathan's friend concluded that the material found in the wreckage was extraterrestrial in origin. Given that this was literally the most important scientific discovery in the history of humanity, and given that Clark's origins were still a secret, the only logical conclusion is that Jonathan Kent silenced his scientist friend and that his friend's remains are now fertilizing some of the crops on the Kent homestead. Finally, the guilt catches up with Jonathan Kent, who kills himself by jumping into an easily avoidable tornado. But young Clark's mind has already become twisted and scarred. It is at this point that the script descends into full-blown open-source chaos. General Zod and his followers appear and demand that the Earthlings turn over Kal-El, which is a strange demand given that Kal-El has been living his life in secret and nobody has heard of him. Zod also demands that they turn over Lois Lane, which makes even less sense because she had just tracked down Kal-El 2 minutes before and there is no reason for General Zod to even know who she is. But Kal-El needs somebody to help him escape from General Zod, so, logic be damned, Lois Lane becomes part of the demands. We later find out that General Zod wants to terraform the planet Earth to make it identical to Krypton and wishes to use the magic Codex Twinkies to feed an entire new generation of Kryptonians. This is totally logical. After all, who among us would want to live in a world that grants you godlike powers when you can simply re-engineer the planet to turn yourself into a normal person? But have no fear, because another screenwriter steps in to explain that Zod does not want the new generation of Twinkie-addicted Kryptonians to grow up having to adapt to having godlike powers. Then another screenwriter steps in and has Zod mock Kal-El over how easy it was for Zod to adapt to his new powers, which completely defeats the purpose of the earlier argument. Despite all of this, Zod persists in his efforts to turn Earth into Krypton, a process that will kill all of the humans on Earth. Despite his murderous inclinations, Clark chooses to fight on behalf of the Earth and destroys Zod's terraforming device. Then, no longer able to control the twisted darkness that has grown inside him, Clark mercilessly kills Zod and claims his father's murderous mantle. As the film ends, Clark flies away to hide out in his stolen spaceship and put together his plan to murder Batman. But that is a story for another time. I am Raveena the Intern and this has been Movies That Suck. Thank you for joining me.
And now it's time for our featured film reviews.
Let's get into our first featured film review for today. The film is Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And there is the poster right there with the creepy scarecrow. This is a suspense supernatural movie and it is a PG-13 film, so it is sort of teen friendly. It was released in the year 2019, directed by, deep breath Steve, deep breath, Andre Uvredal. And on the one hand, I apologize for what I'm sure was a mispronunciation of your name. On the other hand, the English language gives you 26 perfectly good letters to choose from. When you start making up your own, you're kind of asking for it. Come on, Norway, get it together. The cast includes Zoe Colletti, Michael Garza, Gabriel Rush, Austin Zager, Natalie Ganshorn, Austin Abrams, Dean Norris, who you might remember from Breaking Bad, and Gil Bellows, who you might remember from The Shawshank Redemption or Ally McBeal. Let's start setting our expectations for this film. So what you should expect is a scary story about teenagers investigating supernatural horrors in 1968 rural Pennsylvania. You should watch this one because it's an enjoyable big-budget scare film with excellent visual effects that does not rely upon blood and gore. If you like Stranger Things or Super 8 or It, you will probably like this film. And as far as calibrating your expectations, this is the scale we like to use every week. Very campy movies on the far left, very serious movies on the far right. Understand, this is not a measure of quality of the film. This is just a measure of what your expectations should be going into the film if you want to enjoy it. For this film, it is a big screen, mainstream, summer-type release. This one goes right down the middle. There's going to be a fair bit of popcorn movie atmosphere to this, a fair bit of seriousness. This one is straight down the middle. So let's get into a film summary. This is a big-budget, mainstream, scary movie that takes place in rural Pennsylvania in 1968. It is PG-13 and teen-friendly, in the same vein as Stranger Things. Now, preteens might still find this one kind of scary, but high schoolers most likely will be okay with this one. 3 teenage friends and a teenage drifter have befriended, explore a local abandoned house that is rumored to be haunted. The house was once the home of the wealthy Bellows family, who helped to found the town. The Bellows' reclusive daughter Sarah had allegedly been a witch responsible for the deaths of several children in years past. Sarah had a talent for writing scary stories. While in the house, the teens find a book of Sarah's stories, which they take with them. Big mistake. Once removed from the house, new stories begin to appear in the book. The same events then begin to play out in the real world with tragic results. Now, this is based upon a series of stories, which I am going to be very honest, I have not read. I am not familiar with the books, so I am not going to attempt to assess this in terms of is the movie faithful to the books or not. I am going to review this purely as a movie, going into it with no preconceived notions or no knowledge about the subject one way or another. Those of you who are fans of the book, you'll have to tell me if you thought this was a faithful adaptation or not, or if you liked it or not. I'm rating this purely as a film and nothing else. Let's get into the villain profile. There are multiple villains in this film. This film has kind of an anthology feel to it, as every new story appears in the book, a different villain appears. They're all different. They're all creepy. We're just going to talk about one of them today. We're going to talk about one called the Jangly Man. And there he is, and he is just creepy looking. He belongs to a class that, for lack of a better word, we could describe as supernatural creepy zombie monster. His special powers are, well, first of all, he is immensely strong and fast and highly resistant to damage, but weirdly, he can disassemble and reassemble himself at will. So his arms and legs can just kind of drop off, his head can just kind of drop off, all his stumps and torsos and everything else can kind of move themselves to where they need to be, and then they can put themselves back together. So he has no signature weapon, he doesn't really need one. His signature technique is disassembling himself to get in and out of tight spaces, then reassembling himself and chasing you down because, as I said, he is immensely strong and fast. Let's talk about things Steve liked about this film. It is big budget, it has excellent production values, and it looks great on the screen. This film was produced by Guillermo del Toro, and it just visually, as you would expect, being from the del Toro lineage, it just looks fabulous on screen. It is a beautiful 1968 period piece. It captures the pastoral atmosphere of Pennsylvania very well, and it captures the feel of the time very well. Opening scene, as they're panning through the city, you will see what looks like maybe a 65 or a 66 Mustang GT350, which, in fairness, you probably would not have seen in Pennsylvania in 1968, but still, it kind of drives the point home that this is a 60s film, and it's just beautiful. It is a well-written story. It is well acted with a likable cast. It has an enjoyable ensemble feel on the order, once again, of Stranger Things or Super 8 or It or even Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and maybe even Scooby-Doo. So if you grew up watching Scooby-Doo and as you got older you progressed into more and more horror-based things, this still has kind of that Scooby-Doo teenagers investigating what's going on kind of feel to it. It makes good use of tension and suspense. It has excellent creature effects. And the use of different monsters throughout the film gives a bit of an anthology feel, but the film is one single overarching story, so it does not have the disjointed feel of a traditional anthology film. And finally, this film proves that you can make a PG-13 horror film that is accessible to teens, but still scary for adult audiences. I thought this movie did a very good job of splitting the difference between the two, much, again, in the same way as Stranger Things. Let's talk about things that could have been better, and I don't have a lot to criticize about this film, but here's a few. This is a big-budget, mainstream release, and it may feel a bit sanitized and corporatized to some of you, which, of course, it is. The story is a bit predictable. Things like this that have become iconic and inspired so much that came after it, when you go back and watch it, you can't help but for it to feel a little bit derivative because it inspired so much of the stuff that you grew up watching. Even though they use different actors, these films always seem to utilize the same cast of characters. You could pretty much take the cast of characters from this film and take the cast of characters from Stranger Things and map one character to another. So this one is Dustin, this one is Mike, and so on and so on. It is a bit too intense for young audiences, so you know your kids better than anybody, but preteens might be a little put off by this one. On the other hand, it might be a bit too tame for hardcore fans of horror. Now, I am not of the opinion that movies have to be shocking and gory and disgusting in order to be scary. They can be, but they don't have to be. And this movie is scary without being gory and shocking and disgusting. But you may disagree. If you're one of those people that really needs a lot of hardcore gore and violence, this movie doesn't really have that. This movie is scary, and it's more suspense and intensity than anything else. But you're not going to see a lot of blood and guts in this one. So let's get to Steve's scorecard for Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Kills, 4 plus 1 near miss. Car chases, there is a car chase. Possumings, there is a possuming. Fonduings, there are 2 in rapid succession. Cash drawings, there is a cash drawing. Instumpinatings, now this is a little weird. There's 8 plus 8 restumpinatings. And in that same vein, denogginings, there are 2 plus 2 renogginings. Remember when we talked about the Jangly Man? He can disassemble and reassemble himself at will. So you have multiple instumpinatings and denogginings and restumpinatings and renogginings in this film. Yoga failing. You've got one long incident of yoga failing. The whole sequence with the Jangly Man is like one big exercise in yoga failing. It's just going to make you cringe. And finally, creepy spiders. Too many to count. But with your viewing of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, you also get some bonus features such as poop burning. Yes, that Halloween tradition of poop burning. Harold the Scarecrow. You saw him in the poster. You'll see him in the film. He is kind of creepy. Straw barfing. And I don't mean barfing on straw. I mean barfing up straw. Maybe not the worst chef special ever, but still pretty bad. If your friend tells you not to eat the stew, don't eat the stew. You get megazits. You get subdermal spiders, which is sure to send so many of you running for the exits or hiding your head under a blanket. It's not funny, but you do get subdermal spiders in this film. You get a creepy, fat, pale woman thing monster. Actually, more than one. They refer to this as the Pale Woman in the Wikipedia entry because I was curious if this creature actually had a name. I did not include a picture because I didn't want to spoil it for those of you who haven't seen the film yet, but she is just weirdly, creepily terrifying in her own way. And finally, you get talking heads, and I don't mean the band, I mean a literal talking head. So let's get to Steve's final score for Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. I'm going to give it 3 paws out of 4. This is a fun, enjoyable piece of ensemble nostalgia that proves that a film does not have to be gory in order to be scary. Now, on the one hand, it's a little too intense for very young audiences, and on the other hand, it might be a little too tame for hardcore fans, but in general, I consider this an excellent scary movie that managed to be scary without being gory. So, I recommend this film. At the time I'm recording this, it was available free with ads on Tubi. So that is Steve's review for Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark.
And now a word from our wise and noble sponsors at PBDCTV, your nightly heartbeat of horror.
This is Mikey from Out of the Ordinary, and you're watching PBDCTV.
Oh, hi! First thing in the morning, when I'm listening to music and getting a little bit of time for some creepy research, I'm always representing with my PBDC merch. What a better way to have a cup of coffee in the morning.
Don't forget to check out our other cool merch at rootsbleedred.com. That's rootsbleedred.com.
This is Professor Edgar Fluffosaurus from Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat, and when I'm not hosting Monster Chat or knocking down small Japanese cities, I'm watching PBDC TV. Now back to the show.
All right, let's get into our second featured film review for this evening. The film is called Brightburn, and there's the poster right there. This is a superhero horror film, very recent, released in the year 2019. Directed by David Yarovesky and produced by James Gunn, who directed the Guardians of the Galaxy films, the first two, and I assume the third as well. The cast includes Elizabeth Banks, David Denman, Jackson Dunn, Matt Jones, and Meredith Hagner. So let's get into setting your expectations for this film. What you should expect is a mainstream, big screen reinterpretation of the Superman origin story, but with a horror movie twist. You should watch this because, well, it's a well-made, entertaining film that manages to apply a very interesting twist to an otherwise familiar story, but also, in a world of superhero films, a superhero horror film is kind of a welcome addition. Now, I had a little bit of trouble coming up with you might also likes for this film, and what I settled on was The Omen for reasons that we will talk about in a minute. Basically, if you like movies where a kid turns out to be all-powerful and evil, you will enjoy this film. Let's talk about setting your expectations a little bit. Here's the scale we like to use. On the very left side of the scale is the mindset you need to have when you go into a very campy film such as Sharknado or Jason X. On the far right side of the scale, the mindset you need to have going into a very serious film such as Silence of the Lambs. Brightburn is a mainstream release. It's right down the middle. So let's get into a film summary for Brightburn. In this film, Brandon Breyer is an intelligent, slightly awkward 12-year-old boy who lives with his parents on a small farm in the rural community of Brightburn, Kansas. And Brandon's parents were unable to conceive, so Brandon was adopted by the couple as a baby. Well, that's not entirely true. Brandon's parents actually found the baby Brandon inside a spaceship that crashed in the woods behind their farm. Brandon's parents try to raise Brandon as a normal child and keep the truth hidden from him. This is complicated by the fact that, as best as his parents can tell, Brandon is indestructible, has never bled, has never been injured, has never been sick. As Brandon reaches puberty, his behavior starts to change. Now, everybody's behavior starts to change when they reach puberty, and so maybe this is just normal, but Brandon is becoming more secretive and more aggressive. But also, the wreckage of the crashed spaceship, which is hidden in the barn, is calling to Brandon. But what is it telling him? So let's get into our villain profile. Our villain for this film is Brandon Breyer, and there you see a close-up of him right there. He is of the dark superhero class. His special powers are, well, he is basically Superman. He is invulnerable, he has super strength, he has super speed, he has the ability to fly, and he has heat vision, as you can see from the glowing eyes right there. Signature weapon? Well, doesn't really have a signature weapon. Superman doesn't need a weapon, and neither does Brandon Breyer. Signature technique? Well, Brandon is still learning about his powers, so he utilizes multiple techniques throughout the film with no one signature move. So if they make more films in this universe, we'll see if he settles on a signature technique, but for this film, he does a variety of different things. Let's get into things that I liked about this film. First of all, it is well acted and has excellent production values, and it just looks very good on a big screen. The movie invests a lot of effort into building tension and suspense rather than just falling back on action and special effects. Although this is arguably a superhero movie, picking up on that previous point, the director manages to make it feel in part like a supernatural or ghost story. He uses, lighting that switches on and off, figures that appear in the background and then seem to disappear as soon as you look at them. So it's not like an action movie like The Avengers where the superhero is just a bad guy doing bad things, but otherwise it's a superhero action movie. And this is part of the reason why I picked The Omen as a similar film that if you like The Omen, you might like Brightburn, because it's got more of a supernatural, suspenseful feel to it. It's more of a dark character's origin story. The movie manages to make Brandon a likable character at first, but then change your perspective of him as the film goes on. The film does a very good job of that. And the movie manages to make Brandon's powers frightening instead of just fantastic by the use of suspense and interesting sound effects, and I want to talk more about that for just a second. So if you look at the poster, and you can't really see it as well as I would like, but Brandon has made himself a mask, and it looks almost insect-like. Now, early in the film, to establish that Brandon is extremely intelligent. He's in science class and he's asked, what are some of the differences between bees and wasps? And he starts explaining that bees are pollinators and wasps are predators. Then Brandon starts talking about a particular species of wasp that has lost the ability to create nests for itself. So they basically enslave other wasps, or other insects, I should say. They put their young inside the nests of other insects and force the other insects to feed it and take care of it. Now, maybe the filmmakers were implying that that's what the world that Brandon comes from has done for him, or maybe that's just Brandon's interpretation of his role in the world. But one way or another, he seems to take on the persona of this wasp, and when he uses his super speed, they do these kind of insect wing flapping sound effects that are just really creepy and really cool. So it's not just a guy zipping around with super speed, it's a guy zipping around with super speed and occasionally popping up in the shadows, popping up in the background, and then kind of disappearing when you try to get a good look at him. So it feels very, very spooky. And it's not just a superhero movie, it's got a very ghost movie atmosphere to it. Let's talk about some things that could have been better with this film. Now, I'm going to tell you right up front, I like this film and I do recommend it. So this is just a few nitpicks. Number one, the film is familiar and predictable overall because it is a retelling of a well-known story. And there's really no way around that. I mean, if you're doing the umpteen millionth dark origin story or origin story of a superhero character, eventually they all start to sound somewhat familiar. Another problem this film has, the cast is good and I like them and it's well acted, but the cast is too familiar. You've seen them in too many other things and it interferes with the suspension of disbelief. Elizabeth Banks plays Brandon's mother, and you have seen her in everything on God's green earth. You've seen her in a lot of comedies, and it just kind of interferes with your suspension of disbelief when, okay, this is quite obviously Elizabeth Banks, who you know from all the Pitch Perfect movies and so on and so on. Brandon's father is the guy that played Roy on The Office, Pam's fiance. And again, that was a comedy, so it just it intrudes. It's a little bit intrusive upon your ability to enjoy the film. That said, they do a good job in the film. It's not their fault. It's just that they're so recognizable from other things that they've done that it just kind of, it's a little bit intrusive in the back of your mind. This is a relatively big-budget mainstream film that feels a bit corporatized and sanitized. The film invests in character development and suspense at the expense of action and kill count, which I liked, but some may find the film a bit too slow or without enough action. If you're going into this expecting, something like The Avengers, except with the superheroes being bad guys, that's not what you're going to see. This is not going to be battle sequence after battle sequence of Brandon Breyer battling with tanks and airplanes and destroying office buildings. It's an origin story. It is more like The Omen than say Superman. And finally, the film establishes very early on that Brandon's mother is very supportive of Brandon because she is overcompensating for her own parents' apathy. She says right up front at the beginning that her parents wrote her off at a very young age and that we can never do that to Brandon. So her behavior is explained to the audience, and it is important to the story. That said, it gets a little tiresome after a while. She's just the overprotective mother who's never going to assume anything bad about her son no matter what, and it does get slightly tiresome. So let's get to Steve's scorecard for Brightburn. Kills 6, plus another 268 people in a passenger jet, plus one office building at the end. We don't know how many people were or were not in that, so I can just score it as an office building. Plus approximately 10 chickens. Bare breasts. We've got to give it asterisks because yet again it is a dead body, and not just a dead body, it is a special effect of a dead body because Brandon has experimented upon it. Car chases. There is one, and it ends very badly for Brandon's uncle. Hand crushings. Yep, there's one of those. Peeper poppings. Yes, there is a peeper popping, and it will make you squirm. Pac-Mannings. Oh yes, there is a Pac-Manning, and it will make you cringe. Zap-augerings. There is a zap-augering. And finally, curse your sudden but inevitable betrayalings. Yes, the most famous line from the TV show Firefly, from the pilot episode of Firefly. Not one, but two. There are two times when the look on Brandon's face just says, curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal. But with your viewing of Brightburn, you also get some bonus features such as lawnmower tossing. You get Olympic caliber lawnmower tossing in this film. You get terrifying Raggedy Ann wallpaper, and I say terrifying just because, you know, this is a kid who is now 12 years old who's still living in the room that he's lived in since he was a baby, and it has Raggedy Ann wallpaper, and I'm sure it is driving him crazy. And just, I find Raggedy Ann creepy to begin with, and that was from long before I found out that the real Annabelle was in fact a Raggedy Ann doll, so I don't know if they were trying to make an Annabelle reference when they used Raggedy Ann wallpaper in this movie, or if they were just trying to make the point that, you know, the mom still looks at Brandon as her little boy. But one way or another, I just found the wallpaper disturbing. You get the world's strangest pornography, and that might not be literally true, but Brandon has created some pretty strange pornography. You get recurring preteen stalker action, and it is unsettling. You get an embarrassing father-son talk about self-canoodling, which I could have done without, but it's played kind of for laughs, and it's successful. You get yet more evidence that no Hollywood screenwriter has ever met an actual American. This film takes place in rural Kansas, and yet the dad freaks out when the uncle gives Brandon a hunting rifle for his 12th birthday. What? He's just a kid, no guns! I'm sorry. In the real world, rural people living in Kansas, the son would have been taught to shoot a rifle long before then because it would have been necessary to keep predators away from the farm. And plus, the dad does take the kid hunting with him on this trip, so I'm like, are you anti-gun or what? So it's more of Hollywood screenwriters being reflexively anti-gun while simultaneously putting guns in films. Finally, take the world. You'll understand what that means when you watch the film. So let's get to Steve's final score for Brightburn. We're going to give this 3 paws out of 4. I found this an enjoyable film that combines a big-budget superhero concept with a suspense or supernatural feel. Now, it may feel a bit predictable for hardcore fans. It may not have enough kills and action for hardcore fans, but it's a really good choice for new and casual fans of horror. So if you're doing a kind of a movie with friends, and you know you've got that one person who's not necessarily sold on doing horror movies, this might be a good choice for them. But one way or the other, I recommend Brightburn. 3 paws out of 4, and that is our featured film review. We are approaching the end of yet another episode of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat. But before we go, let's take just a couple of minutes to talk about some other stuff Steve watched this week. Number 1, Maniac Cop 3, Badge of Silence. At the time we're recording this was available free with ads on Tubi. This is yet another sequel in the 1980s series of slasher films about a police officer who comes back from the dead to take his revenge on those he feels have wronged him. Now, this film actually came out in the early 90s, but the series began back in the 80s, so I'm calling it an 80s series. This film stars Robert Davi, who you've seen in 100 million different things, and Robert Zadar, with a brief appearance by Doug Savant, which I only mentioned because if you were watching anything in TV or movies at the time, you may have seen him in Melrose Place, or you may remember him from the terrible Matthew Broderick Godzilla movie from 1998. This series really should have stopped at Maniac Cop 2. You might enjoy this film if you're a fan of the series, or if you're a fan of cheesy 80s slasher films in general. Honestly, the first time I saw this film was many, many years ago on the movie channel on Joe Bob Briggs Drive-In Theater. So that kind of gives you an idea of what you're in for when you watch this movie. If you're looking for something that's good fodder for Joe Bob Briggs Drive-In Theater, then this movie might be for you. Otherwise, move along. Second movie, American Sasquatch, also available on Tubi, free with ads at the time we're recording this. I think this is a film about a British guy hunting for Bigfoot. I'm honestly not sure. There is a belief out there that bad movies are always funny, and therefore all you need to do to make an entertaining movie is just make something bad and put it out there and people will enjoy it ironically, and that is not the least little bit true. It has to be bad in a certain way to work for ironic enjoyment, and this film is not it. I bailed out after 11 minutes, which was at least 10 minutes too many. I don't know what they were thinking with this one. Do not engage. No, 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 no on American Sasquatch. Third film, Dead Body. Once again, something that I found on Tubi, free with ads, or at least at the time I'm recording this. In this film, 9 college students meet in a remote mountain cabin and play a game that's supposed to be a deadly spin on hide and seek. But soon, people end up dying for real. Now, this film is plagued by poor acting, poor production values, poor writing. It's a whodunit. It's one of those where you don't know who the killer is until the end, but it's easy to figure out who the who is going to be. As soon as the film starts and you've met all the characters without knowing anything about them, you can just say, yeah, he did it. On the other hand, there's no way on God's green earth you could possibly come up with the why, because they don't give you enough information, so I just want to pound my head on the table with this one. Anyway, I finished this film, but I can't really recommend it. You can do better. So it was quite the disappointing week here at Steve the Cat headquarters outside of our featured films. Don't really recommend Dead Body. Absolutely do not recommend American Sasquatch. Maniac Cop 3, if you're in the mood for kind of some 80s cheesy horror, you might enjoy that one, but even that one, there's better stuff available. So that kind of wraps up a disappointing week of other stuff Steve watched this week. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed it. We had a lot of fun putting this episode together, and we hope you had fun watching. Now, if you did enjoy the show, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and follow. You can find us on Facebook at Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat. And yes, that's Tales with an A-I-L-S. And also, please remember to check out all of my friends and their great programming on PBDCTV. Whether you're interested in horror movies, true crime, weird history, or unexplained events, we're sure to have something for you. And if you're not familiar with PBDCTV, don't worry, it's very easy to find. We're on the World Wide Web at PBDCTV.com, and we're on YouTube at PsychoBunnyDC. We've also got a large presence on Facebook. You can find a page for the mothership at PBDCTV, or you can go directly to dedicated pages for different channels, like Psycho Bunny Death Cult, Psychomantium 13, and Roots Bleed Red. Each channel has a slightly different atmosphere, but they're all a part of the PBDCTV broadcast collective. Well, we'll be back next week with a tribute to the glorious era of VHS cassettes and big hair, the 1980s. It is sure to be a lot of fun, so we hope to see you again then. In the meantime, thank you once again for joining us. Everyone stay safe and have a great week. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye, everybody.